Hey guys, tonight we are about to do something big. Or rather, tonight we are embarking on a gamble that involves your life, your dignity, and the hopes of your entire village. We are traveling back a few hundred years to ancient China to participate in the legendary civil service examination known as the Qiju. But we aren't going there to be the honest bookworm who memorized everything perfectly. No. Tonight, we are playing the role of the desperate, high-tech cheater. We're talking about creating a cheat sheet, or what the ancients called Jiao Dai. This isn't like scribbling a few math formulas on your palm in high school. This is a miracle of microengineering and a high-stakes psychological war. But I have to warn you, under the laws of the time, if you get caught, the best-case scenario is wearing a heavy wooden cane around your neck in public shame. The worst case, you get exiled to the frozen borders, or you might even lose your head. So, this story is a bit intense. You might not survive the first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment below and let me know. What city are you in right now, and what time is it? And if you've ever felt the urge to sneak a peek at a textbook during a test, leave a guilty in the comments so I know I'm not alone. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Even if you are currently tucked into a comfortable mattress, I need you to use a little imagination. Close your eyes. Rewind the clock to around the year 1500, maybe the Ming Dynasty, or perhaps a bit later in the Qing. You are not a modern office worker or a student scrolling through your phone. You are a scholar in a long robe, face pale from lack of sun. You are sitting at a wobbly old wooden table in your home. Outside, the night is pitch black, with only the sound of the cold wind rattling the paper windows. Inside, the flame of your oil lamp is flickering, making your heart race. Why can't you sleep? Because tomorrow is the grand competition. The provincial exam held only once every 3 years. This isn't just a final exam. In this era, the Qiju is the only channel for a commoner to change their destiny. Literally, the only one. It doesn't matter if your father is a farmer, a butcher, or a tofu seller. If you become a juror, a successful candidate, your ancestors are glorified, your social class skyrockets instantly, and even the local magistrate has to bow to you. Mainstream history books always say the examination system was the world's fairest method of talent selection because it broke class barriers. That's true, but the cruel side is the acceptance rate. It was atrociously low. Imagine thousands of candidates flooding the exam center, but only a few dozen pass. The acceptance rate usually hovered between 1% and 5%, sometimes even lower. That is more brutal than getting into Harvard or Yale today. And you aren't solving logic puzzles. You are regurgitating the 4 books and 5 classics that have been analyzed to death for centuries. This brings us to the first major problem we face tonight. Your brain capacity is maxed out. Do you know how many words you need to memorize? The Great Learning, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Analects, MENCIUS, ... plus the Book of Songs, Book of History, Book of Rites, Book of Changes, and the Spring and Autumn Annals. The main text of these 4 books and 5 classics alone is over 400,000 characters. Sounds manageable. No, you're naive. You also have to memorize the commentaries by Jushi and the explanations from scholars across dynasties. That adds up to a database of millions of words. And during the exam, you need to recite these backwards and forwards. If you miss a character or deviate slightly from the orthodox interpretation, your paper goes straight into the trash. Academia is actually still debating this issue today. Some historians argue that this extreme rote memorization locked the smartest brains in piles of old paper, preventing them from inventing things like the steam engine. But there is another camp that believes this highly unified cultural training maintained the long-term stability of China's massive empire. Regardless of what the scholars argue, right now as you sit under that oil lamp you only feel one thing: despair. You have been studying for 20 years. Your hair is thinning, and you are severely nearsighted from squinting at books in bad light. Your family sold 10 acres of land to support your studies. Your mother even pawned her only silver bracelet. The whole village chipped in to pay for your travel expenses to the city. Before you left, the village elder held your hand and said, "Kid, don't come back if you don't pass." Is the pressure high? It's enough to make you vomit. You look at the pile of books on the desk, but your mind is a blank sheet. Just a moment ago, you remembered a line from the annals, but now you've forgotten the specific dimensions of morning clothes described in the Book of Rites. Fear drowns you like a tidal wave. If you don't cheat, you will likely be part of the 99% cannon fodder. You will go back to your village in shame, a laughingstock, destined to be a poor schoolteacher for the rest of your life. At this moment, a thought grows wildly in your mind. I need to bring something in. This isn't an impulse. It's a rational survival choice. Since your brain can't hold it all, you need external storage. But in ancient times, cheating wasn't as simple as hiding a phone in your sleeve. First, the exam venue, the Gongyuan, is basically a giant prison. You will be locked in there for days, eating, sleeping, and using the toilet in a tiny cell less than 2 square meters wide, and the body's searched before entering. It's 10 times stricter than modern airport security. Here's a niche little fact for you. To prevent candidates from smuggling notes, the Imperial Court once mandated that candidates' clothes must be single-layered, no lining allowed. Even the steamed buns you brought for lunch had to be sliced open to check for hidden paper strips. Even crazier, there are records suggesting that soldiers conducting the searches were rewarded with silver if they found cheating tools, which gave these guards a near-perverted enthusiasm for the task. So, the puzzle before you is, how do you compress hundreds of thousands of words of classics into something small enough to bypass this fortress-like security? Regular paper won't work. It's too bulky. Writing on your palm. It smears with sweat and holds too little. You need advanced methods. You need to push human craftsmanship to its limit. You look at the dim light, your eyes growing steady, perhaps even a bit manic. You are no longer the timid scholar. You are now a special agent about to challenge the highest security system of the Ming or Qing Empire. You pick up a needle, you pick up a specially made ultrafine brush. You have decided to take your destiny into your own hands, or more accurately, into the contraband we are about to create. Tonight's journey begins with the needle in your hand. You are holding a piece of white silk. It's expensive, probably costing you a month's worth of food, but you didn't buy it to make a handkerchief for a lover. You bought it because silk is thin, durable, and most importantly, silent. When you crumple paper, it crinkles. When you crumple silk, it whispers. And in the dead silence of an exam hall, a whisper is the difference between passing the test and being dragged out by your collar. Tonight, you are going to perform a miracle of textile engineering. You are going to sew the 4 books and 5 classics into your underwear. Now, you might be thinking, why underwear? It's not just because it's funny, it's because the Imperial Court's regulations on clothing were getting tighter every year. By the mid-Qing dynasty, the rules stated that candidates could only wear single-layer garments, unlined, to prevent hiding notes in the seams. So, the logical countermove for a desperate scholar like you is to turn the garment itself into the note. You lay the silk flat on your table. The oil lamp is sputtering, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. You take a deep breath. This is where the real work begins. You aren't just writing, you are transcribing a library. You have to copy hundreds of thousands of characters onto a piece of fabric the size of a vest. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that you've probably heard in school but never really felt. The flyhead script, Ying de Shao Kai. This wasn't just a font style. It was a physical necessity. You have to write characters that are roughly the size of a sesame seed. Yet every single stroke, the dot, the hook, the sweep must be perfectly legible. If you write a character wrong and misread it during the exam, you fail. If you smudge the ink, you fail. You dip your brush, your hand shakes, then steadies. You start writing on the silk lining of what will become your inner vest. You start with the great learning. The way of the great learning involves manifesting. Virtue, ... You write line after line, column after column. The characters are so dense, they look like a colony of ants marching across the white plain of the fabric. Here is a niche little detail that often gets overlooked. You probably aren't doing this alone. History tends to focus on the male scholars. But behind many of these intricate cheating garments was likely a wife, a sister, or a mother. In a time when men rarely touched a needle and thread, the construction of the cheat shirt was a family secret. There are accounts suggesting that women in the scholar's family would help sew the written panels into the lining of the clothes. Using stitches so fine they were almost invisible to the naked eye, it adds a layer of tragic romance to the whole illegal operation, doesn't it? The whole family huddled under a lamp, conspiring against the empire, stitching their hopes into a piece of dirty laundry. As you write, your eyes start to burn. The strain is immense. You are writing thousands of characters per square inch. You have to be careful about the ink, too. Standard ink might bleed on silk if you sweat, and, believe me, you will be sweating in that exam cell. So, you might have mixed a little alum or glue into the ink to make it water resistant. You are practically a chemist now. Let's look at the garment you are making. It's a vest, maybe a pair of socks, or even the waistband of your trousers. Museums in China today actually house some of these surviving artifacts. One famous example is a cheat coat that contains over 40,000 characters. Just imagine the sheer dedication required to produce that. It's a masterpiece of calligraphy, arguably more impressive than the essays written during the actual exam. But here is where the academic controversy comes in. Historians are still debating the actual utility of these cheat shirts. One camp argues that because the civil service exams required you to write original essays interpreting the classics, not just recite them, having the text on your back was useless if you didn't understand it. They say these cheat shirts were merely psychological blankets, a talisman to reduce anxiety. However, the opposing camp argues that many exam prompts asked for obscure quotes or specific context from the classics to prove your erudition. In those cases, having the source material right inside your shirt was a nuclear weapon. If you could quote a rare line from the Book of Rites, verbatim, the examiner would think you were a genius with a photographic memory dot back in the room. You are finished with the front panel. Your neck is stiff. You rub your eyes, and for a second, the room spins. You look at the silk dot, it's no longer white. It's a gray block of dense, black information. You carefully stitch this panel into the inner lining of your robe. You try it on. It feels ... heavy, not physically, but spiritually. When you wear this shirt, you are walking around with the wisdom of the sages pressing against your skin, but you are also wrapping yourself in a crime. You can feel the characters scratching slightly against your chest. Every time you move, you hear the faint rustle of the silk. To anyone else, it's just the sound of clothes moving. To you, it sounds like a siren. You stand in front of a bronze mirror. You look the same as you did yesterday, a poor, tired scholar. But now, you are armed. You have the cheat codes to the universe buttoned up under your chin. But there is a problem. Writing on silk with a standard brush is clumsy. The hair of a goat or wolf used in standard brushes is too soft, too thick for the microscopic precision you need on this uneven fabric surface. You made a mess of the first few lines. You realize that your standard equipment isn't going to cut it if you want to fit the entire Confucian canon into your pocket. You need a tool that defies the limits of biology. You look at the corner of the room. There's a small hole in the wall. You hear a scratching sound. A mouse scampers across the floor. You stare at the mouse, and suddenly, you have a terrible, brilliant idea. You aren't looking at a pest anymore. You are looking at the raw material for the ultimate writing instrument. So, you've got your eyes on that mouse. It's scurrying along the baseboard, totally unaware that it's about to become a part of academic history. You aren't hungry, but that's not why you're looking at it. You are looking at its face. Specifically, those long, stiff, tapered whiskers twitching in the air. This brings us to one of the most bizarre yet ingenious tools in the cheater's arsenal, the rat whisker brush shoe subai. You see, regular calligraphy brushes are made from goat hair, which is soft and absorbent, or wolf hair, actually weasel, which is springy. But for the microscopic work, you need two deriding characters that are literally smaller than a grain of rice. Those brushes are like trying to paint a portrait with a mop. The tips splay out. The ink flows too fast. One tiny slip, and your Confucius says turns into a black blob, ruining hours of work. You need something stiffer, something that holds a needle-sharp point but still carries ink. You need whiskers now. Picture yourself in this ridiculous situation. You are a dignified scholar, a man of letters, crawling on your hands and knees under the bed, chasing a dirty rodent. You finally trap it. I won't describe the grim details of how you harvest the materials. Let's just say the mouse makes a sacrifice for your future career. But one mouse isn't enough. A single brush needs a bundle of whiskers to form the core. You might need dozens of rats. This is a niche little reality of the trade. Before you ever stepped into the exam hall, you were probably running a small-scale pest control operation in your neighborhood. You were the weird guy asking neighbors if they had any rats they wanted to get rid of. Once you have the whiskers, the craftsmanship begins. You bind them tightly, perhaps surrounding them with a layer of softer fine hair to hold the ink, encased in a slender bamboo tube. When you dip this rat whisker brush into the ink, it doesn't soak it up like a sponge. It holds a tiny, controlled bead of black liquid. When the tip touches the silk, it feels different. It's scratchy, resistant. It doesn't glide. It engraves. Here is a mainstream historical touchpoint you can brag about at parties if you weren't hiding your crime. The rat whisker brush wasn't invented by cheaters. It is legendary in the world of high art. It is famously associated with the sage of calligraphy, Wang Shizi. Legend has it that his masterpiece, the preface to the Orchid Pavilion poems Lanting Su, arguably the most famous piece of calligraphy in Chinese history, was written with a rat whisker brush. This leads to tonight's academic controversy. Scholars and art historians have argued for centuries about whether Wang Shizi actually used a rat whisker brush. Some claim it's the only way to achieve those distinctive, sharp, energetic strokes seen in the Lanting Su. Others argue it's a myth, a misunderstanding of ancient texts, and that rat whisker was just a metaphor for a specific type of stiff wolf hair. But for you, sitting in the dark, it doesn't matter. If it's good enough for the sage of calligraphy, it's good enough for your illegal cheat sheet. You test it out. The characters you write are impossibly small. We are talking about writing 20 to 30 characters on a surface area the size of a coin. With a regular brush, this is physically impossible. With the rat whisker brush, you feel like a surgeon. You can delineate the complex strokes of the character Turtle, which has a gazillion strokes, inside a space no bigger than a freckle. You spend the next few weeks hunched over, eyes watering, hand cramping into a claw. You are transcribing the analects on 2 tiny strips of paper now, not just silk. You are creating scrolls that are only 2 inches wide but 10 feet long, rolled tightly into cylinders. But as the days tick by, panic sets in again. The exam is approaching fast. You look at your progress. You've only copied 2 books. Your hand is shaking so bad you can barely hold the chopsticks to eat your plain rice. At this rate, you'll die of exhaustion before you even get to the exam. Manual transcription is noble. Sure, it's personal, but it's inefficient. You are one man against a library. You realize that in an era of technological advancement, doing this by hand is for suckers. You need scale, you need industrial precision. You've heard rumors in the tea houses, whispers about a certain alleyway in the city, where the booksellers don't just sell the classics, they sell ... special editions. Editions that fit in the palm of your hand. You decide to put down the rat whisker brush. It's time to stop being a craftsman and start being a consumer. It's time to visit the black market of the printing world. You pull your hood up. You step out of your dark, ink-stained room and into the bustling streets of the city. It's daytime, but for you, everything feels shadowy. You aren't heading to the Grand Library or the official academy. You are heading to the district known for its bookstores Li Chang in Beijing, or perhaps a similar quarter in Nanjing. On the surface, these shops sell standard Confucian texts, brushes, and paper. But you are looking for something that isn't on the shelves. You walk into a shop that looks respectable, maybe a bit too respectable. You catch the shopkeeper's eye. You don't say, "I want to cheat." You use a euphemism. You ask for sleeve editions, Zuzan Ben, or the text that fits in a palm. The shopkeeper looks you up and down. He sees your desperation, your poverty, and your scholar's robe. He nods and leads you to the back room. Or maybe he pulls a small velvet-wrapped package from under the counter. He unwraps it, and what you see takes your breath away. It is a book, but it is a book for a doll. It is a complete edition of the 5 classics, but the entire volume is smaller than a box of matches. It measures perhaps 5 centimeters by 4 centimeters. You pick it up, it's light as a feather. You squint. The pages are made of imported Bible paper or an incredibly thin, tough local paper known as gold dust paper. This brings us to a mainstream historical marvel. The commercialization of cheating. By the late Ming, and especially the Qing dynasty, cheating had become an industry. These weren't rough handwritten notes anymore. These were mass-produced masterpieces of printing technology. You flip through the pages. The characters are printed in what is known as fly-head script, invoking the style you tried to write. But perfect. The strokes are thinner than a human hair. Here is a niche, slightly mind-blowing fact. To achieve this level of detail before the advent of Western lithography in the late 19th century, Chinese artisans used blocks of wood carved with superhuman precision. Some sources suggest that the carvers chosen for this work were often myopic, nearsighted, because their vision was naturally magnified at close range, allowing them to carve thousands of characters onto a block of wood no bigger than your palm. Other theories suggest they used blocks made of harder materials like horn or ivory to prevent the tiny characters from blurring after repeated printing. The shopkeeper tells you the price. It's astronomical. A single set of these miniature cheat books costs more than your entire trip to the capital. It costs as much as a farmer earns in 5 years. Why so expensive? Because this is contraband. In the Qing dynasty, printing, selling, or possessing these books was a capital crime. If the shopkeeper gets caught, his shop is burned, and he is thrown in prison. If you get caught buying it, well, your career is over before it starts. You are paying for the danger premium. You hesitate. You think of your mother's pawned bracelet. You think of the hungry rats you chased for whiskers. But then you look at the book again. It's perfect. It's legible. It's durable. It contains the answers to every question the examiners could possibly ask. It is a condensed brick of pure success. You pull out the last of your silver, the emergency money meant for your journey home. If you failed, you slap it on the counter. You are all in. There is a fascinating academic controversy surrounding these books. Historians and sociologists debate what the existence of these mass-produced cheat books says about the society of that time. One camp argues that it represents the moral decay of the empire, that the pursuit of power had completely hollowed out the ethical core of Confucianism. They see these books as evidence of a rotting system. However, another camp, often economic historians, views this as a triumph of the market economy. They argue that where there is a demand desperate students, the market will innovate a supply driving technological advancements in printing that actually predated some Western techniques. Basically, your desire to cheat helped push the boundaries of printing technology. You take the tiny book, it feels warm in your hand. You slide it into your sleeve. It disappears instantly. But now you have a new problem, a physical problem. When you wrote on your underwear, the cheat sheet was part of your clothes. It was soft, it moved with you. But this is a solid object. It has corners, it has bulk. If a guard pats you down and feels a hard lump in your sleeve or your pocket, you are dead. You need to hide it, not just on your body, but in your gear. You look at the pile of stationery you are allowed to bring into the exam cell, an inkstone, brushes, water pot, charcoal, candles. Your eyes land on the inkstone. It looks solid. It looks innocent. But to you, now a criminal mastermind, it looks like a container. You are about to ruin a perfectly good piece of office equipment. You are going to turn your stationery into a smuggling compartment. You are sitting in your room, surrounded by shavings of wood, wax, and stone dust. You look less like a scholar preparing for a civil service exam and more like a bomb maker in a basement. The expensive miniature book you bought is great, but you can't just walk in holding it. You've decided that if the guards are going to search your clothes, you will hide your secrets in the objects that are above suspicion. You are going to weaponize your stationery. The 4 treasures of the study: brush, ink, paper, and inkstoner, the sacred tools of the Confucian scholar. They are symbols of culture and refinement. But tonight, you are going to desecrate them. Let's start with the inkstone yan tai. This is a heavy slab of stone or ceramic used to grind ink sticks into liquid. It's solid, durable, and usually black dot to the naked eye. It's just a rock. But to you, it's a safe. You've acquired a very specific type of inkspit stone, likely from the same shady dealer who sold you the book. This isn't a solid block of slate, it's a piece of trickery. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact: the double-layered inkstone. On the surface, it looks normal. You can grind ink on it. You can tap it, and it sounds solid. But underneath, there is a hollowed-out compartment covered by a sliding panel so seamlessly fitted that you can't see the join. The craftsmanship is exquisite. It's a bit ironic, really. The amount of engineering talent used to create this device is exactly the kind of practical skill the empires should be hiring for. But instead, it's being used to help you fake your way into a job writing poetry. You carefully dismantle the binding of your miniature book. You separate the pages into thin sheaves. You slide a stack of them into the belly of the inkstone and slide the stone panel back. Click. Locks. Perfect. Unless a guard decides to smash your inkstone with a hammer, he'll never find it. But the inkstone can only hold so much. You have more data to hide. You look at the candles. The exam lasts for days, and you will be working into the night. Candidates are required to bring their own candles. This is your next vector. You take a thick wax candle. You heat a thin metal rod over your oil lamp until it glows red. You carefully, surgically, push the hot rod into the base of the candle, melting a channel straight up alongside the wick. You have to be steady. If you melt the exterior wall, the game is over. You take another scroll of your cheat sheet, this one rolled tighter than a cigarette tan. Slide it into the tunnel you just melted. Then, you drip some molten wax over the bottom to seal the hole. Once it cools, you rub it with dirt to make it look old and used. Now, you have a candle of knowledge. But here is the terrifying part. The part that will keep you awake at night. This is a literal time bomb. Imagine the scene in the exam cell. It's 2 a.m. You are stuck on a question about the Book of Changers. You light your cheat candle. As the wax melts down, it gets closer and closer to the hidden paper. You have to time it perfectly. You need to wait for the candle to burn low enough to expose the top of the paper, so you can tweeze it out with your fingernails. But if you wait too long, poof! The paper catches fire. Not only do you lose your cheat sheet, but a sudden flare-up of fire in a dark cell is going to attract the guards. Why did your candle just explode? Examinee 52. You can't exactly say, sorry, my copy of Mencius was highly flammable. Here is a niche little fact that highlights the absurdity of this arms race. The hollow brush handle. You know those brushes you bought? The bamboo handles are naturally hollow, but usually they are sealed or too thin. However, there were custom-made brushes with slightly thicker shafts and screw-top caps disguised as decorative jade ends. You could fit a tightly rolled strip of paper inside the handle of the very pen you are using to write the exam. It's the inception of cheating. The answers are inside the tool you use to write the answers. But be careful, if the brush is too light, or if it rattles when you shake it. The game is up. You might have to stuff cotton wool in there to stop the paper from moving. Now, let's address an academic controversy that historians still argue about. The destruction policy. We know from records that guards were instructed to be thorough. But how thorough? Some historians argue that the search protocols authorized guards to break open inkstones and snap candles in half if they had any suspicion. They cite complaints from scholars about their expensive equipment being ruined by overzealous, illiterate soldiers who enjoyed smashing things. However, an opposing group of scholars suggests that this total destruction was rare. They argue that the guards were often intimidated by the scholar's status. Remember, a passing scholar could become their boss tomorrow, or were simply bribed to tap the inkstone lightly and move on. If the guards had truly smashed every inkstone and snapped every candle, the exam couldn't physically take place because no one would have tools to write with dots. So, was the security theater, or was it a demolition derby? You are gambling your life on the hope that it's the former. You look at your table. The inkstone is loaded, the candles are loaded, the brushes are loaded. You have turned your stationery set into a library. But as you sit there, feeling like a genius, your stomach growls. You realize you haven't eaten all day. You look at the dry steamed buns mantou and the bag of rice you've prepared for the trip. And then, the paranoia hits you again. The guards know about hollow inkstones, they know about hollow candles, these are old tricks. But what about the food? Food is organic, it's messy. Guards hate touching it. You pick up a knife, you pick up a mantou. Steamed bun, you aren't going to eat it. You are going to perform surgery on it. If you can hide a scroll in a rock, surely you can hide one in a dumpling. But you have to be careful. The regulations regarding food are even weirder than the ones for clothes. You've heard rumors that they force you to cut your food into pieces before you even enter the gate. Tonight, you are going to learn how to bake the classics into your breakfast. You are standing in your kitchen, or what passes for a kitchen in your cramped lodgings. You are holding a knife in one hand and a mantou steamed bun in the other. To anyone watching, you look like a man about to make a sandwich. But you know better. You are operating on a Trojan horse. You've decided that the inkstone is too risky. The clothes are too obvious. But food, everyone needs to eat. The exam lasts for 3 sessions, each lasting 3 days and 2 nights. That's 9 days total. If you don't bring food, you will starve. The guards can't ban food, so you figure this is your safest bet. You carefully bore a hole into the side of the steamed bun. You take a tiny wax-sealed pellet containing a cheat sheet, maybe the tricky passages from the Book of Right Sand. Shove it deep into the fluffy white dough. You pinch the hole shut. You steam it again for a minute to seal the surgical scar. It looks perfect. It looks delicious. It looks like a one-way ticket to a government job. But before you pack your basket with these knowledge buns, you need to know what awaits you at the gate. You need to understand the absolute culinary nightmare that is the exam security check. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact: the broken food policy. By the time of the High Qing era, the authorities had realized that candidates were baking notes into biscuits, hiding waterproof scrolls in soup, and stuffing hollowed-out sausages with paper. So, they issued a rule that would make any health inspector vomit. The rule was simple: cut everything. When you arrive at the gate, the soldiers will not just look at your food, they will butcher it. Regulations stated that steamed buns must be sliced open, mooncakes must be broken in half, sausages must be chopped into inch-long segments. Even the preserved duck you brought. They will hack it apart to make sure the body cavity is empty. If you bring a lotus root, which has natural holes, a favorite for smugglers, they will slice it into discs to ensure nothing is jammed in the tunnels. Imagine the scene. You have spent hours preparing these buns. You stand in line. You watch the guard ahead of you. He is a rough, sweaty soldier. He has been patting down hundreds of unwashed men all morning. His hands are covered in dust, ink, and sweat. He grabs the examinee's bag of food. He takes a knife which he probably hasn't washed since the Ming Dynasty and starts hacking. Chop, chop, chop. He cuts the buns in half. He smashes the eggs. He pokes his fingers into the rice. Then, he shoves the pile of mangled, touched, broken food back into the basket and yells, "Next!" This leads to a niche. Slightly stomach-churning fact: the dirt floor. Reality historical anecdotes tell us that the inspection area was often crowded and chaotic. It wasn't a sterile lab, it was a dirt yard. When the guards were aggressively cutting open your food, pieces would inevitably fall onto the ground. In the mud, in the horse manure, did they apologize and give you a refund? No, they kicked it back toward you. You, the dignified scholar, would have to scramble on your hands and knees to pick up your sliced, mud-covered bun. Why? Because you cannot leave the exam cell for 3 days. If you don't eat the dirty bun, you don't eat. Many scholars wrote about the humiliation of eating muddy rice mixed with their own tears. It was a degradation ritual designed to break your ego before you even picked up a pen. So, looking back at your Trojan bun, you realize the flaw in your plan. If the guard slices your bun and the knife hits the wax pellet, clink, you are done. The white dough will fall away, revealing the black ink of your crime. It's too risky. You start to panic. Maybe you shouldn't use a solid bun. Maybe you should use something. Naturally confusing. Some candidates tried to use walnuts. They would carefully split the shell, remove the nut, insert a paper ball, and glue the shell back together. But the guards got wise to this. They started making candidates crack every single walnut at the gate. Can you imagine the sound? Thousands of walnuts being smashed at dawn. It must have sounded like hail on a tin roof. Now, let's dive into an academic controversy that historians are still fighting about: the food safety conspiracy. We know that during the exam, sickness was rampant. Candidates would often collapse, hallucinate, or suffer from severe dysentery diarrhea in their cells. The traditional explanation is exam stress or weak scholar constitution. But modern medical historians have raised a different theory. It was the food inspection that poisoned them. Think about it. You take perfectly good food. You let a guard with unwashed hands touch every square inch of it. You slice it open, exposing the moist interior to the air, the dust, and the flies. Then, the candidate takes this exposed, contaminated food into a damp, hot cell and lets it sit there for 3 days without refrigeration. The controversy is, was this an unintended side effect of strict security, or was it a calculated indifference? Some scholars argue that the state simply didn't care if a few hundred candidates got food poisoning, as long as no one cheated. The cleanliness of the food was sacrificed on the altar of fairness. It suggests a system that valued bureaucratic rigidity over human life. A theme you'll find recurring throughout this night. You look at your knife, you look at the bun dot, you realize that hiding the cheat sheet inside the food is suicidal. If they cut it, you're caught. But what about the container? You look at the basket itself. You look at the bamboo strips woven together to make the handle. You look at the pot used to carry water. You decide to abandon the bun strategy. It's too gross. And the risk of accidental discovery during the chopping phase is too high. You need to get past the cut everything rule. You need a hiding spot that isn't biological. But before you can re-strategize, you hear a sound outside. The rooster is crowing. The sky is turning a bruised purple dot. It's time. You have to pack up. You have your underwear written with invisible ink, hopefully. Your hollow inkstone, your loaded candle, and your bag of soon-to-be mangled food. You are as ready as you will ever be. You step out of your door. You join the river of other nervous men flowing toward the examination hall. You can smell the fear in the air. Or maybe that's just the unwashed bodies. You are approaching the Dragon Gate Longmen. This is it. The point of no return. You are about to face the most invasive, humiliating, and thorough body search in human history up to this point. You thought the food inspection was bad. Wait until you see what they do to your body. The sun hasn't fully risen yet, but the noise is deafening. You are standing in a sea of thousands of men, all jostling, coughing, and praying under their breath. This is the entrance to the GONGYUAN. It looks less like a school and more like a fortress. High walls, watchtowers, and rows of soldiers with spears. The air smells of unwashed bodies and fear. You hear a cannon fire. Boom, the gates open. It's not a stampede. It's a slow, terrifying shuffle. You move forward, inch by inch. Clutching your basket of mutilated food and your tricked-out inkstone, you see the line splitting up into different lanes. Each lane is manned by 4 soldiers. These aren't the ceremonial guards you see at the palace. These are the Sujian-jun, search soldiers. They are big, they are loud, and they look like they haven't slept in a week. This brings us to the most dreaded moment of your life, the search. Mainstream history books might tell you that candidates were searched. That sounds polite. That sounds like a TSA agent asking you to empty your pockets. What is about to happen to you is a systematic dismantling of your dignity. When it's your turn, the soldier doesn't say please, he barks. Strip. You hesitate. You are a scholar. You have spent your life learning about propriety, about the importance of covering the body, about face. And now, in front of thousands of people, under the cold morning sky, you have to take it all off. You untie your robe, you take off your outer layer. The soldier grabs it and shakes it violently. He runs his hands along every seam, feeling for the crinkle of paper or the stiffness of silk. He throws it on the dirt. Keep going, he yells. You take off your inner shirt, the one you didn't sew the cheat sheet into. Smart move. You are shivering now, it's chilly. You take off your trousers. You are standing in your undergarments. All of it, he commands. You drop your final layer. You are naked. This is the reality of the Imperial examination. Before you can write about the lofty ideals of the sages, you must stand stark naked in the mud while a stranger inspects your body like you are a piece of livestock. The soldier walks around you. He isn't just looking, he is hunting. Here is a niche, slightly terrifying fact. The soldiers were financially incentivized to find your cheat sheet. In many dynasties, if a soldier caught a candidate cheating, he didn't just get a pat on the back, he received a capture reward, which often included the silver the candidate was carrying, or a bonus from the government that equaled several months of his salary. This means the soldier looking at you isn't just doing his job. He is looking at you like you are a walking lottery ticket. He wants you to be cheating. He is praying he finds a piece of paper so he can get rich. This financial motivation leads to an invasive thoroughness that borders on assault. He tells you to lift your arms. He checks your armpits. He tells you to open your mouth. He peers inside, looking under your tongue. He checks your ears. Then comes the part that makes you want to die. He tells you to bend over. Yes. The body cavity search is not a modern invention of the prison system. There are historical accounts suggesting that because desperate candidates would roll up oil paper scrolls and hide them in the rectum, yes, really. Soldiers were instructed to check every orifice. You do as you are told. You have no choice. If you refuse, you are expelled. Your family is disgraced. The 10 years of studying are wasted. So, you swallow your pride. And you let him look. He grunts. He finds nothing. He looks disappointed. He wanted that bonus. He gestures to your hair. You have to undo your top knot. Your long hair falls down your back. He runs his fingers through it, checking for tiny scrolls tied into the braids. He checks the soles of your feet. Get dressed, he mutters, kicking your pile of clothes toward you. You scramble to put your clothes back on. Your hands are shaking so hard you can't tie the sash. You feel violated. You feel small. You look around and see other scholars doing the same, hopping on one leg, trying to put on pants, faces burning with shame. This leads to a fascinating academic controversy: the ritual of humiliation. Historians and sociologists have long debated the purpose of this extreme search. One camp argues it was purely practical. Cheating was rampant, and the state needed to protect the integrity of the meritocracy. If the exam wasn't fair, the government would lose legitimacy. But another camp argues that this was a deliberate psychological tactic. They suggest that the emperor wanted to remind the literati class, who were often arrogant and powerful, that they were nothing without him. By forcing the nation's smartest men to strip naked and submit to the rough handling of illiterate soldiers, the state was breaking their ego before empowering them. It was a message. You are only a reckless official because we allow you to be at your core. You are just a naked body subject to our power. It's the ultimate hazing ritual. You aren't just passing a test. You are submitting to the absolute authority of the state. You finally get your robe tied. You pick up your basket. You look at the soldier one last time. He is already yelling at the next guy to strip. You hate him, but you also fear him. You stumble forward, past the search line. You think you are safe. You think the worst is over. You take a step, but your foot feels heavy. Wait, you freeze. You realize you forgot something. Or rather, you realize the soldier missed something. He checked your clothes. He checked your body. He checked your food. But he didn't check the one thing that is physically separating you from the ground. You look down at your shoes. In the chaos of the strip search, you took your shoes off. He shook them, and you put them back on. But he didn't cut them open. He didn't peel back the layers of the sole. You suppress a smile. It's a nervous, terrifying smile, because you are walking on a secret, literally, the double-bottomed shoe. It's a classic for a reason. And as you walk toward the inner sanctum of the exam hall, you can feel the slight crunch of paper beneath your heel with every step. You are now officially inside the belly of the beast. You've survived the strip search. You've reassembled your dignity and your clothes. And you are shuffling along a narrow stone path toward your assigned cell. But there is something wrong with the way you are walking. You look a bit stiff. Like a penguin trying to walk on ice. You are trying to look casual, but every step is a calculated risk. Why? Because you are literally walking on the answers. This brings us to the thick-soled shoe strategy. In the history of smuggling, whether it's gold, drugs, or Confucian, classics footwear has always been a prime real estate. But for you, an ancient Chinese scholar, the shoe is not just a hiding spot. It's an engineering project. Let's talk about the anatomy of your shoes. Mainstream history tells us that traditional Chinese cloth shoes, especially the ones worn by the gentry, often had what is called a 1,000-layer sole qianseng di. This wasn't literally 1,000 layers, but it was close. It consisted of many layers of cotton cloth, glued together with flour paste and stitched through with hemp thread. The result was a sole that was thick, durable, and white. To the average person, it's a shoe. To you, it's a bookbinding. You spent nights carefully slicing open the heel of your shoe. You removed the inner layers of cotton and replaced them with tightly pressed sheaves of paper. You essentially bound a book inside your heel. Then, you sewed it back up. The result? A shoe that looks normal from the outside but has a hollow chamber in the heel containing the entire text of the Analects. But here is the catch, and it's the reason you are walking like a zombie. Paper doesn't bend like cotton. Every time you flex your foot, you risk cracking the spine of your hidden book, or worse, making a sound. Crinkle. In the noisy courtyard. It's fine. But in the dead silence of the exam corridor, that sound is a death sentence. So, you have to walk flat-footed. You have to glide. You look like you are practicing Tai Chi, but really, you are just trying not to destroy your cheat sheet. And there is a bigger danger: the weather. Gongyuan exam centers were notorious for bad drainage. If it rains, and it often did during the autumn exams, the courtyards turn into swamps. If you step in a puddle, the water will soak into the cotton sole, seep through your stitching, and hit the paper. Imagine the horror. You look down and see black ink bleeding out of your heel, staining the white sole. It would look like your foot is bleeding darkness. To prevent this, you might have wrapped your notes in oil paper, an early form of waterproofing. This brings us to a niche. Slightly hilarious fact: the squeaky shoe phenomenon. Oiled paper is waterproof, yes, but it is also noisy. It rustles. Historical anecdotes suggest that experienced examiners would sometimes walk behind candidates and just listen. If a candidate's shoes made a sharp swish-crackle sound instead of a dull thud, they were pulled out of line. You were basically wearing tap shoes to a library. Because this trick became so popular, the government eventually had to intervene. This leads to the era of the shoe ban. By the late Qing dynasty, the regulations on footwear became obsessively specific. The rules stated that candidates could not wear boots with double layers. They could not wear shoes with thick felt soles. In some extreme cases, candidates were forced to wear open-backed slippers or even go barefoot in the final staging area to prove they weren't hiding anything. Imagine being a highly educated intellectual forced to wear flimsy slippers in the freezing cold, all because your predecessors couldn't stop hiding books in their boots. Now, let's dive into an academic controversy that historians are still debating: the gait analysis theory. We know guards watched the candidates, but how scientific was it? Some historians argue that the search soldiers were actually trained to spot specific physiological signs of guilt, including the stiff-legged walk caused by shoe tampering. They argue this was an early form of forensic behavioral analysis. However, a more skeptical camp of historians argues that this is giving the soldiers too much credit. They claim the soldiers were mostly illiterate conscripts who didn't care about behavioral science. They only caught people who were clumsy enough to drop something or who looked visibly terrified. They argue that the super-observant guard is a myth created by the state to scare candidates into compliance. So, as you walk to your cell, you are gambling that the guard watching you is part of the lazy and tired camp, not the behavioral analyst camp. You finally make it. You find your cell number. It's a tiny, open-faced stall labeled with a character from the 1,000-character classic. You step inside. You sit down on the hard wooden board. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. You carefully slip off your shoes. You check the SOS. No ink, bleed, no rips. You are safe. But as you sit there, looking at the blank walls, a new panic sets in. You have the books on you, in your underwear, in your inkstone, in your shoes. But what if the question is something you didn't pack? What if the prompt asks for a contemporary political analysis that isn't in the 4 books? Your cheat sheets are static databases. They can't think for you. You realize that carrying the library isn't enough. Sometimes you need a live search engine. You need someone on the outside to tell you the answer after you've seen the question. You look up at the high walls of the compound. You look at the sky. You see a flock of birds flying over the exam hall. And you remember the plan you made with your cousin, who is currently waiting outside the wall, a mile away. You aren't just relying on shoes anymore. You are about to initiate an airstrike of information. You are going to use the oldest wireless technology in the world, the pigeon. Or, if the bird fails, a very large brick. You are sitting in your designated cell, the house. It is a 3-walled brick cubicle with no door, open to the southern breeze and the patrolling guards. You have your board set up, one for a seat, one for a desk. The exam papers have just been distributed. You unfurl the official paper. Your heart sinks. The topic isn't one of the standard passages from Mencius you memorized in your shoe. It's an obscure policy question involving tax reform during the Tang dynasty and its application to current flood relief. You panic. You check your underwear scribbles. Nothing. You check the inkstone. Nothing. Your static database has failed you. You need a processor. You need a ghostwriter, Chang Shou. Luckily, you have a plan B, a plan that involves the sky and the physics of projectile motion. You look at your water pot. It's a large ceramic vessel. But inside, it's not just water. There's a waterproof bladder, and inside that bladder, sitting in a drug-induced stupor, is a pigeon. This brings us to the flying pigeon transmission, Fei Ge Chuan Shu. Now, you might think this is the stuff of wuxia novels, but in the desperate world of the Imperial exams, it was a logistical reality. You carefully pull the bird out. It's groggy. You've been feeding it seeds soaked in mild spirits to keep it quiet during the search. You quickly scribble the exam prompt onto a tiny strip of onion skin paper. You roll it up and insert it into the small bamboo tube attached to the bird's leg. You wait for the patrol guard to turn the corner. The moment his back is turned, you stand up, shielding the bird with your wide sleeves, and toss it into the air. Flap, flap, flap. The bird ascends. You hold your breath. If a guard looks up and sees a pigeon launching from cell 45, you are done. Archers were sometimes stationed on the watchtowers specifically to shoot down suspicious birds. But today, the sky is gray and the bird blends in. It heads home. Your family, or the expensive team of hired scholars you paid, is waiting in a rented house just outside the exam compound walls. They catch the bird. They read the topic. The gunmen, hired test takers, go to work, crafting a perfect essay in record time. But now comes the hard part. The return. Homing pigeons are great at going home. They are terrible at flying back to a specific 3-foot-wide cubicle in a complex of thousands of identical cubicles. The bird can't help you now. You need a different delivery system. You wait. The sun sets. The compound goes dark, lit only by the thousands of flickering candles in the cells. You are listening for a specific sound. Thump. Something lands on the roof of your cell. Or, if you are lucky, right onto your desk. This introduces the flying stone, fei shi, or passing over the wall technique. Your accomplices outside have wrapped the finished essay around a rock or encased it in a ball of wax or heavy mud. They have crept up to the base of the exam compound wall. They know your cell number. They have calculated the trajectory. They heave the package over the 15-foot wall. This is a mainstream historical fact. The geography of exam halls often facilitated this. The Gongyuan was usually in the city center, surrounded by dense residential areas. Families would rent the upper floors of nearby tea houses or brothels that overlooked the walls to signal their candidates or throw things in. However, this method was incredibly dangerous. It was literally a game of blind toss. If your cousin has a bad aim and the rock lands in the cell next to yours, you have just given your neighbor a free essay. Or worse, if it hits a patrolling guard in the head, the lockdown begins. There is a niche, slightly hilarious anecdote about this: the bucket brigade. Sometimes the wall was too high or the distance too far. So, candidates utilized the only people allowed to move freely in and out of the compound: the water carriers and the latrine cleaners. These were low-status workers who refilled water and hauled out buckets of waste. You didn't just bribe them, you formed a human chain. You would go to the latrine, a stinking trench at the end of the row, pretending to have diarrhea, a common ailment. You would accidentally drop a piece of silver and a note into the hand of the cleaner. He would take it out, give it to your accomplice, get the answer, and smuggle it back in the bottom of a clean water bucket. It was a literal dirty network. The highest philosophical thoughts of the empire were being trafficked through the lowest sanitation channels. Now, let's look at the academic controversy surrounding this: the efficacy of the wall. Historians debate just how effective these over-the-wall methods really were. One camp argues that they were rampant and effective, citing the numerous edicts issued by the emperor, specifically banning loitering near the exam walls and ordering the demolition of tall buildings overlooking the compound. Why ban it if it wasn't working? But the opposing camp argues that this is survivor bias. We hear about the successful throws or the spectacular failures, but practically speaking, the odds were terrible. The exam compounds were huge. Your cell might be hundreds of yards from the nearest wall. Unless you were lucky enough to be assigned a border cell, throwing a rock that far was physically impossible. They suggest that most outside help stories are exaggerated legends, and the real cheating happened quietly, internally, through bribery. Back in your cell, you are staring at the object that just landed. It's a ball of mud. You break it open. Inside is a crumpled piece of paper covered in tiny script. It's the essay. The gunman has come through. You feel a rush of adrenaline. You smooth out the paper. You dip your brush. Now, all you have to do is copy it. But wait, you can't just copy it. If you copy it too perfectly, the examiner might get suspicious. Why does this tired student suddenly sound like a 60-year-old literary master? You have to dumb it down a little. You have to add a few mistakes. You are editing genius into mediocrity to save your skin. As you write, you hear footsteps. The guard is coming back on patrol. You quickly slide the mud ball paper under your exam board. You pretend to be deep in thought, staring at the moon. The guard stops. He looks at you. He sniffs the air. He doesn't smell fear. He smells pigeon, or maybe just the latrine bucket you visited earlier. He moves on. You're safe for now. You have the answers. But you are only on day 1. You have to survive 2 more days and nights in this box. And you have a new problem. The cell is small, it's cramped, and you have a lot of evidence piling up. The pigeon, what do you do with it now? The broken mud ball, the wax from the candle. You need to organize your crime scene. You are about to play the highest stakes game of hide and seek in a room smaller than a closet. Welcome to your new home. For the next 3 days and 2 nights, you are the proud tenant of a Haoshie examination cell. If you thought your college dorm room was small, let me introduce you to the architectural marvel of the Gongyuan. Your cell is roughly 1.3 meters wide and 1.6 meters deep. It has 3 brick walls and an open front. There is no door. There is no window. There is just you, the open air, and the row of cells opposite you. Your furniture consists of 2 wooden boards, haoban. One sits lower to act as a seat, the other sits higher to act as a desk. At night, if you are lucky and the boards fit the grooves in the wall correctly, you can pull the top board down to the lower level to form a makeshift bed. If you are unlucky, and many were, the boards are warped or too short, meaning you sleep curled up like a shrimp on a single plank, praying you don't roll off into the dirt. But you aren't here to critique the interior design. You're here to play a high-stakes game of hide and seek in a space smaller than a closet, while a guard walks past the open entrance every 15 minutes. You have the mud ball paper from your cousin, the one thrown over the wall. You have the shoe notes you retrieved earlier. You have the candle scroll. Your desk is currently a crime scene of evidence. You need to organize this chaos. This brings us to the draft paper camouflage. Mainstream history tells us that the exam provided red-lined paper for the final answer and straw paper for drafts. The draft paper is your best friend. It is messy, chaotic, and piled high. You take your tiny cheat sheet, the one with the essay written by the gunman, and you slip it between the sheets of your legitimate draft paper. When the guard walks by, you are simply a diligent scholar flipping through your rough notes. You aren't hiding, you are blending. The trick is to keep your left hand constantly hovering over the pile. The moment you hear the crunch of boots on gravel, your hand drops, covering the special slip. But what about the solid evidence? The mud shell, the wax seal? You look at the corner of your cell. There's a small, foul-smelling basket or bucket. This is your bathroom. Yes, the gong tong, excrement bucket. It is the most degrading part of the exam, but for a cheater, it is a sanctuary. Guards are human. They do not want to inspect your waste. They will search your clothes, your food, and your inkstone, but they will instinctively recoil from the dung basket. You take the broken pieces of the mud shell and the shavings of the wax candle. You bury them deep in the bucket. It's gross, but it's safe. You have just successfully laundered your contraband through a sanitation loophole. Now, let's talk about the curtain, Vimo. In some dynasties, candidates were allowed to bring a piece of oilcloth or canvas to hang over the front of their cell to block the wind and rain. This was the cheater's dream. A curtain meant privacy. Behind that curtain, you could light a candle, unfurl a scroll, and read comfortably. However, the authorities weren't stupid. This leads to a niche, petty reality of the exam: the curtain regulations. Depending on the strictness of the chief examiner that year, the order might come down. Curtains up. This meant that during daylight hours, or any time the proctor felt suspicious, all curtains had to be tied back. You would sit there, exposed to the elements and the eyes of the patrollers. So, you developed the sleeve wall technique. Chinese robes have wide, flowing sleeves. When you hold your brush with your right hand, you raise your left arm to hold the paper steady. If you position your left arm correctly, your massive sleeve creates a localized tent, a mini curtain right over your desk. To the guard walking by, you are just holding your paper. To you, looking down into the tunnel of your sleeve, you are reading the tiny text pinned to your wrist or resting on the desk, shielded from the peripheral view. But there is a danger in the cell that is worse than the guards: the boards themselves. Here is a fact that often gets left out of the glorious history of the meritocracy. The infrastructure was crumbling. Many exam centers were built centuries ago and rarely maintained. The brick slots that held your desk boards were often loose. Imagine this. You have your cheat sheet laid out. You have your official exam paper. You have your open inkstone. You lean forward to copy a sentence, and the board slips. Crash. The board falls. The inkstone flies. Black ink splatters everywhere, all over your face, all over the floor, and worst of all over your cheat sheet. The noise attracts the guard immediately. Now you are standing in a puddle of ink with a piece of illegal paper stuck to your shoe. Game over. This happened so often that candidates would bring little wedges of wood or folded paper to jam into the brick slots, stabilizing their wobbly desks. You are literally shoring up the ruins of the empire just to take a test. Now, let's address an academic controversy: the sleeping policy. Historians debate how strict the monitoring was at night. The exam lasted for days. You had to sleep. But could you sleep? Some records suggest that guards were strictly ordered to wake up any candidate who looked like they were slacking off or sleeping during the day, forcing them to work until exhaustion. Others argue that the night shift guards were notoriously corrupt and lazy, often falling asleep themselves or taking bribes to look the other way while candidates lit candles to copy notes. The controversy centers on the humanitarian aspect. Was the sleep deprivation a bug or a feature? Some scholars argue the system was designed to test physical endurance as much as mental acuity. Only the strongest could govern. Others say it was just incompetence. For you, in the cell, the night is your friend. The guards are tired, their lanterns are dim, the shadows are long. You have copied the first half of the essay, but you are paranoid. What if they search you again tomorrow morning? What if a gust of wind blows the paper out of your cell? You decide you need to get rid of the evidence as you use it. You look at the strip of paper you just finished copying. You can't throw it in the bucket, it might float. You can't burn it, smoke is a signal. You look at the paper, it's rice paper, it's organic. You tear off the top half of the cheat sheet, you roll it into a ball, you put it in your mouth, you chew, it tastes like dried dust and ink, you swallow. This is the swallow style, Tunji. It's the ultimate disposal method. No one can search your stomach. You are literally digesting the classics. You're becoming one with Confucius, but you can't eat the whole library. You still have the reference books for the next day. You need a way to keep the information accessible but unintelligible to anyone else. If a guard finds your notes, he needs to think it's just doodling, not a cheat sheet. You need to stop writing in standard script. You need a code. You pull out a fresh sheet of scratch paper. You aren't going to write "the master said." You're going to write a string of nonsense characters that only you can decrypt. You are sitting in your cell, staring at a blank sheet of paper. To the guard walking past, it looks like you are staring at nothing, perhaps lost in a creative stupor. But to you, that paper is screaming with information. You are looking at a masterpiece of encryption. This brings us to the next level of the game. Cryptography. You realized earlier that carrying a literal copy of the Analects is dangerous. If a guard finds a tiny book in your shoe, it's undeniable proof of guilt. But what if they find a piece of paper that looks like a grocery list, or worse, a child's doodle? Plausible deniability is your best friend. So, you have developed a code. First, let's talk about the head and tail method, Kong Tu Lu Wei. You don't write the full sentences. You know the texts well enough that you just need a prompt. So instead of writing, "The master said," to learn and then do, you simply write, "learn." Your brain fills in the rest. You reduce a 500-character essay into a 50-character string of keywords. To an outsider, it looks like a nonsensical list of verbs: learn, fly, govern, tax, water. To you, it's a roadmap. But the guards are smart. They know keywords. So you go deeper. You start using radical substitution. You take the character you want to write, strip away its main component, and replace it with a dummy part. Or you use phonetic loan characters. You write a character that sounds like the word you need but means something totally different. You're writing a story about cooking a large fish in a blue pot, but when you read it aloud in your local dialect, the homophones correspond perfectly to a treatise on managing a large state with benevolent laws. You are literally hiding the classics inside a recipe. This leads to a mainstream historical technique, invisible ink, yin shang mo. Yes, spycraft wasn't invented during the Cold War. Ancient Chinese scholars were using alum water, Ming Fan Shui, centuries ago. You dissolve alum crystals in water. You write with it. It dries clear. The paper looks perfectly white and pristine. So, how do you read it? 2 ways. Method 1. The water reveal. You wet the paper slightly, maybe with a damp cloth or saliva, and the alum characters absorb water differently than the surrounding paper, appearing as faint, translucent watermarks. Method 2. The heat reveal. This is the cooler but more dangerous one. You hold the paper near your candle flame. The alum-treated areas scorch and turn brown faster than the untreated paper. Imagine the scene in your cell. It's 3 a.m. You are holding a blank piece of paper dangerously close to your candle. You're watching brown characters magically appear, ghost-like, on the page. The path of the superior man is. You quickly copy it down onto your official exam scroll. Then, you hold the paper too close to the flame and let it burn to ash. No evidence left behind. Here is a niche, slightly mind-bending fact. The embroidery code, Chi Shu An Ma. Some candidates wore clothes with elaborate embroidered patterns, flowers, dragons, clouds, but the patterns weren't random. The number of petals on the flower, the curve of the dragon's claw, the spacing between the clouds, these were binary codes. A flower with 3 petals meant Book 3. A leaf pointing left meant Chapter 1. A leaf pointing right meant Chapter 2. You could literally read your own sleeve just by looking at the stitching. It's a wearable database. The guard sees a nice floral pattern. You see the table of contents for the doctrine of the mean. It's genius because it's openly visible. You don't have to hide it, you just have to look at your arm. But what if you are terrible at memorizing codes? What if panic wipes your memory? You might resort to the blind cipher. This is where you bring a text that is allowed in the exam, like a standard rhyme dictionary or a calendar, but you've marked it with microscopic dots. A dot above the 3rd character on page 10 refers to a specific pre-agreed sentence in the cheat sheet you memorized months ago. You are using a legal book as a decoder key for the illegal knowledge in your head. Now, let's dive into an academic controversy: the counter-cryptography unit. Historians have debated whether the Imperial Court actually had specialists trained to break these codes. Some records from the Qing dynasty mention technical experts being brought in to analyze suspicious papers found on candidates. One camp of historians argues this shows a sophisticated level of state surveillance and cryptographic awareness. They claim the state was actively evolving its detection methods to match the cheaters. However, the opposing camp argues that these experts were mostly theater. They suggest that the vast majority of caught cheaters weren't brought down by codebreakers cracking a complex cipher, but by simple human error, looking guilty, sweating too much, or dropping the paper. They argue the state didn't need to break the code, they just needed to find a piece of paper with weird symbols on it. In the eyes of the law, weird symbols equals guilt. You don't get a trial to explain that cooking fish really means cooking fish. You just get the kangi. Back in your cell, you are sweating. You've successfully decoded your recipe and used the alum water trick. Your official exam paper is looking good. It's filled with elegant calligraphy and profound insights that definitely didn't come from your own brain. But then, disaster strikes. You are exhausted. Your hand slips. You knock over your water jar. Water splashes everywhere. It soaks your trousers. It soaks your shoes. And suddenly, the invisible ink on your spare blank sheet starts to appear. The water activates the alum. The characters for benevolence and righteousness are blooming on the wet paper like ghostly flowers. And just at that moment, you hear the heavy boots of the patrol captain stopping right in front of your cell. He isn't walking past. He is standing there. He looks at you. He looks at the wet paper. He sees the ghost writing emerging from the blank page. Your heart stops. The code has failed. The technology has betrayed you. Logic and stealth are no longer options. You have been caught red-handed, or rather, wet-handed. There's only one card left to play. It's not a trick. It's not a tool. It's the universal language of corruption. You look the guard in the eye. You don't panic. You slowly, carefully reach into your sleeve. You aren't reaching for a knife. You are reaching for something heavier, shinier, and much more persuasive. You are frozen. The water is dripping from your table onto the dirt floor. The invisible characters on the wet paper are glowing like neon signs in the dim light of the cell. The guard is standing right there, his spear resting loosely in his hand, his eyes locked on the paper. This is the moment where technical skill ends and human engineering begins. You don't scream. You don't cry. You don't fall to your knees. Any loud noise will attract the chief examiner, and he cannot be bought. He is a high-ranking official with a reputation to uphold. But this guy, this grunt standing in front of you, he is a Su Tianjun, a search soldier. He's likely a conscript, paid pennies, cold, hungry, and probably hates the government just as much as you do. You slowly, deliberately make eye contact. You don't look guilty. You look like a business partner. You reach into your left sleeve. This is why you saved that specific pouch of broken silver, sui yin. You didn't spend it on the expensive books. You didn't spend it on the hotel. You saved it for him. This brings us to a mainstream historical reality, the purchase of the pass, Mai Fang. Corruption in the Qing dynasty exams wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The soldiers guarding the cells were notoriously underpaid. Historical records indicate that their daily stipend during the exam period was barely enough to buy a bowl of noodles. The government essentially expected them to supplement their income through gray means. You aren't bribing a deviation from the system, you are paying the toll fee of the system. You slide your hand toward the edge of the cell. You don't hand him the silver openly. That would be amateur. You use the ancient sophisticated technique known as the sleeve handshake, Shu Li Qian Kun. This is a niche, almost theatrical skill. In the marketplace of antiquity, merchants would haggle prices by grasping each other's hands inside their long, wide sleeves. By squeezing different fingers or pressing knuckles, they could signal numbers and prices without a single word being spoken, keeping the deal private from bystanders. You beckon him closer. He steps in, ostensibly to inspect the evidence. You reach out, your hands meet inside the tunnel of your sleeve. You press a jagged piece of silver, maybe one tael, maybe two, into his rough palm. It's heavy, it's cold, and it speaks louder than any essay you could write. He freezes. He feels the weight. He knows exactly what this is. Now, a split-second calculation is happening in his brain. If he turns you in, he gets a reward, sure. But that reward has to be processed by bureaucracy. He might see it in 6 months, minus the cut his captain takes. But this silver? This is liquid. This is immediate. This is pork and wine for his family tonight. He looks at you. You look at him. You give a slight nod. He withdraws his hand. The silver is gone. He looks down at the wet paper with the ghostly writing. He grunts. Then he does something incredible. He kicks some dirt over the puddle. "Be careful with your water," he mutters, loud enough for the neighboring cells to hear. "Don't ruin your official answer sheet." He turns around and walks away. You let out a breath that feels like it tears your lungs. You just bought your life. But this interaction isn't just about greed. It leads to a fascinating academic controversy. The betting on the winner theory. Historians and sociologists argue about the psychology of these guards. One camp believes it was pure economic desperation. They were poor. They took the money. Simple. However, another camp argues for a more complex social investment dynamic. These soldiers knew that the man sitting in the cell might be a future magistrate, a governor, or a high court official. In the Chinese social hierarchy, a juren or jinshi, successful candidate, was a god among men. If the soldier shows mercy now, and you pass, he has a potential favor to call in later. Or at the very least, he avoids making a powerful enemy. There are folktales of officials tracking down the guards who humiliated them during the exam and destroying their lives. Conversely, there are stories of officials rewarding the guards who turned a blind eye. So when he took your silver, he wasn't just taking a bribe. He was buying an insurance policy against your future power. He was betting that you, the cheater, were going to win. But the transaction has a cost for you too. You are now broke. That silver was your travel money home. If you fail this exam, you are begging your way back to the village. The stakes just got infinitely higher. You have to pass now. You have literally invested your exit strategy into the silence of a stranger. And there is another layer to this corruption. Sometimes the guards were the ones initiating it. This is the blackmail trap, Zaha. There are accounts of guards who would plant evidence on innocent candidates. They would drop a ball of paper in your cell, then find it, and demand a bribe to stay quiet. You, the terrified scholar, would pay up even if you were innocent just to avoid the risk of expulsion. It was a protection racket disguised as exam security. In your case, you were guilty. But the dynamic is the same. You are now part of the dirty chain. You aren't just a scholar, you are an accomplice. The guard disappears down the row. You are alone again. You quickly shove the wet, incriminating paper into your mouth and swallow it, just to be sure. You clean up the water. You look at your official exam paper. It's pristine. It's a lie, but it's a beautiful one. But as the adrenaline fades, a new feeling takes over. Exhaustion. Not the I need a nap kind, but the my soul is leaking out of my ears kind. You have been awake for 36 hours. You have lived through terror, negotiation, and intense mental labor. The cell starts to feel different. The walls seem to be getting closer. The flickering candlelight is casting shadows that look, wrong. You rub your eyes. You look at the guard standing at the end of the row. Wait. Is that a guard? Or is it something else? You've heard stories about this. The exam hall ghosts. The spirits of failed candidates who hanged themselves in these very cells. They say they come out on the second night to exact revenge on the living. You blink. The figure is gone. But then you hear a voice, a whisper, right next to your ear. You missed a character. You jump. You look around. There is no one there. Welcome to the psychological breakdown phase of the exam. You have survived the physical search and the human corruption. Now, you have to survive your own brain. It is the dead of night on the second day. The moon is hidden behind thick clouds. The only light comes from the dying charcoal in your brazier and the thousands of other faint flickering lights from the cells around you. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional cough, the grinding of an inkstick, or a sudden sharp cry from a nightmare. You are exhausted. Your eyes are dry and gritty. You have been staring at tiny characters for 48 hours straight. You are dehydrated, hungry, and sitting in your own filth. And this is when the exam hall changes. It stops being a test center and starts being a haunted house. You look at the blank brick wall in front of you. The shadows from your candle are dancing. Suddenly, the shadow detaches itself from the wall. It takes the shape of a person, a woman, a man with no head. This brings us to a mainstream historical phenomenon, the avenging ghosts, Encho-ji. In Chinese folklore, there's a strong belief that the exam hall is a place of karmic judgment. It is said that the spirits of those you have wronged, people you swindled, lovers you abandoned, or rivals you sabotaged, can enter the exam compound freely. The Dragon Gate blocks humans, but it does not block ghosts. You, the cheater, are prime real estate for these spirits. You are already feeling guilty. You know you are a fraud. Your brain is priming itself for punishment. You hear a rustling sound. You look down at your exam paper. For a split second, the characters don't look like ink. They look like crawling beetles. You blink, and they are ink again. Then, you see him. Sitting in the corner of your tiny cell. A man in a tattered scholar's robe with a rope around his neck. This leads to a niche, grim reality. The hanging ghost, Diao Si Gui. Historically, the pressure of the exam was so intense that suicides inside the cells were not uncommon. Candidates would snap. They would use their sash or belt to hang themselves from the roof beam of the cell. Because the cells were so small, their feet would often be dragging on the ground, making it a slow, agonizing death. Legend says these failed ghosts linger in the cells, jealous of the living. They whisper wrong answers in your ear. They blow on your neck. They try to nudge your elbow so you ruin your calligraphy. You squeeze your eyes shut. It's not real, you tell yourself. It's just the stress. But is it? This brings us to tonight's academic controversy: the carbon monoxide theory versus the psychosis theory. For centuries, these visions were treated as genuine supernatural events. Accounts of ghostly retribution appear in countless official records and memoirs. If a candidate went mad and started screaming, it was because a ghost had possessed him. However, modern medical historians propose a terrifyingly scientific explanation. Look at your environment. You are in a three-walled box. You have blocked the opening with a sleeve or a curtain to hide your cheating. You are burning charcoal for heat and candles for light. Ventilation is poor. The theory is that many candidates were suffering from acute carbon monoxide poisoning. The symptoms: confusion, dizziness, visual hallucinations, paranoia. So that woman in red standing at the entrance of your cell, she might just be your brain cells dying from lack of oxygen. That demon sitting on your chest, that's the heavy toxic air settling in the bottom of your cell. You aren't being haunted. You are being slowly asphyxiated. But in the year 1600, you don't know about carbon monoxide. You only know about guilt. You look at the candle. The flame turns green. Another classic symptom of bad air or ghosts. You start to panic. You think about the cheat sheet in your shoe. You think about the silver you bribed the guard with. You feel like the eyes of your ancestors are burning holes in your back. "I shouldn't have done it," you whisper. Suddenly, a scream pierces the night. It comes from a few rows down. It's a raw, guttural scream. "I didn't do it! She made me do it! Get away!" Then, the sound of the wood crashing. A board falls. Guards are running. You hear the clanking of chains. Someone else has cracked. Someone else saw the ghosts. This is the madness of the hall, Gongyuan Feng Ji. There is a specific rule for this. If a candidate goes insane, dies, or gets sick, they are not carried out through the main gate. The main gate is for the auspicious living. The dead and the mad are dragged out through a small hole in the back wall, often called the corpse gate or water gate. You listen to the guards dragging the screaming man away. You hear his heels scraping against the gravel. Then, silence returns. You are trembling. You are cold. You look at your essay. It's only half finished. You have a choice. You can let the fear consume you, curl up in a ball, and fail. Or you can embrace the madness. You can use the adrenaline. You pick up your brush. You dip it in the ink. You decide that if you are going to hell for cheating, you might as well go there as a government official. You write furiously. You are no longer copying the cheat sheet. You are channeling it. The hallucinations actually help you focus. The world outside the cell ceases to exist. There is only the paper, the ink, and the whispering voice telling you the next character. Dawn breaks. The ghosts fade. The candle burns out. You have survived the night. The exam is over. The guards come to collect the papers. You hand yours over with a shaking hand. It is done. You stumble out of the cell. You walk out of the dragon gate, past the soldiers who stripped you, past the spot where you ate the dirty bun. You find your family waiting for you. They cheer. They see a hero. But you know the truth. You look back at the high walls of the Gongyuan. You left a piece of your soul in there. But the story isn't over. Handing in the paper is only the beginning of the danger. Now, the grading begins. And if they find out, if they find a pattern in your essay, or if that guard you bribed talks, or if someone snitches, you aren't just facing failure, you are facing the Kange. Let's talk about what happens when the plan goes wrong. Let's talk about the punishment that makes the ghosts look friendly. You are walking out of the exam hall, the sun hitting your face. You feel light. You feel like a survivor. You start to fantasize about the banquet your family has prepared, the accolades, the government position that awaits. But then, physics betrays you. Maybe it happens right at the gate. Maybe it happens a week later when the examiners are cross-referencing the papers. Or maybe, just maybe, that little piece of paper you tucked into your sleeve, the one you forgot to swallow, drifts out as you bow to the chief examiner. It flutters to the ground. It lands on the stone pavement. Time stops. The guard sees it. The examiner sees it. You see it. That tiny scrap of paper is no longer just paper. It is a death warrant for your social life and possibly your physical one. Welcome to the Kangye, Jia Ho. This brings us to a mainstream historical reality, the punishment of the wooden collar. If you were caught cheating in the Qing dynasty, you aren't just given an F and sent to detention. You are stripped of your scholar status forever and sentenced to wear the Kangye. Imagine a square wooden board, roughly 1 meter by 1 meter, with a hole in the center for your neck. It's heavy. Standard weight was around 25 to 35 pounds, approximately 11 to 16 kilograms, but for severe cases, it could be heavier. They lock it around your neck. You cannot take it off. You cannot lie down comfortably. You cannot turn your head. But the worst part isn't the weight. It's the geometry. The board is so wide that your hands cannot reach your mouth. You physically cannot feed yourself. You are reduced to the status of an infant. You must rely on the pity of strangers or family members to spoon-feed you. And they don't lock you in a dungeon. That would be too private. They sentence you to standing in the kanj at the school gates. You are chained right outside the local academy or the exam hall, the very place you tried to enter. You are put on display. Every student, every former classmate, every teacher walking in has to pass by you. They see you, dirty, smelling of your own waste, because you can't wipe yourself either, with a heavy board crushing your shoulders. Pasted on the board is a piece of paper listing your crimes: cheater, fraud, disgrace. This is the genius of the punishment. It isn't just physical torture. It is the total destruction of your face, mianzi. In a society built on reputation, you are being socially murdered in slow motion. This leads to a niche, terrifying fact: collective punishment, lianzuo. You might think, well, at least my family is safe. Wrong. The Imperial Code operated on the idea that if a student cheats, it is a failure of his entire support network. First, your tutor is punished. The man who taught you? He gets fired and sometimes beaten for failing to instill virtue. Then, your neighbors. In the Bao Jia system, a community policing system, if one person commits a crime, the neighbors could be fined for not reporting it. But the hardest hit is your father, the man who sold the land, the man who pawned the silver. He doesn't just lose his investment, he loses his standing in the clan. He can no longer walk with his head high in the village. You haven't just ruined your life. You have extinguished the light of your entire lineage. There are stories of fathers committing suicide out of shame after their sons were caught in the Kangye. And if your crime was severe enough, say, you were part of a large conspiracy or bribed a high official, the kanj is just the appetizer. The main course is exile, fa pei. You are sentenced to be sent to the frontiers. In the Qing dynasty, this usually meant Ninguta, in modern-day Heilongjiang or Xinjiang. You are put in chains. You have to walk thousands of miles in the winter. The survival rate for these marches was grim. You are walking into the freezing void of the empire. If you survive the journey, you become a slave to the soldiers stationed there. You, the delicate scholar who couldn't lift a bag of rice, are now breaking rocks in the frozen tundra for the rest of your life. This brings us to tonight's academic controversy, the class immunity debate. Historians have crunched the numbers and found a disturbing pattern. While the laws were draconian on paper, the application was flexible. One camp of historians argues that the law was a spider web. It caught the small flies, poor scholars like you, but let the big wasps, sons of high officials, break through. They cite instances where the sons of powerful ministers were caught cheating, but instead of the kangwe and exile, they were simply reprimanded or banned from taking the exam for one cycle. Their fathers paid a fine, greased a few palms, and the incident was hush-hushed. However, an opposing camp argues that the emperor, especially strict ones like the Yongjung emperor, made a point of executing high-ranking corrupt officials to show that justice is blind. They point to the famous case of the 1858 Shuntian exam fraud, where the Grand Secretary Su Shun ordered the beheading of the chief examiner, a very high official, and several others. It was a bloodbath designed to terrify the elite. So the controversy is, was the Kang a tool of justice or just a tool to keep the poor in line while the rich played by different rules? Back to you. You are standing in the Kange. It's been a month. Your shoulders are raw and bleeding. Your legs are swollen. People throw rotten vegetables at you. You see your old study partner walk by. He passed. He is wearing the official scholar's cap. He doesn't even look at you. He looks through you. You realize that the hell you feared in the exam cell wasn't the ghosts. It is this. It is the reality of being a non-person in a hyper-stratified society. Eventually, the sentence ends. You are released. But you are dead. No one will hire you. No one will marry you. You drift away, maybe becoming a beggar, maybe a bandit, or maybe you wander into the mountains to become a monk, trying to forget the characters you once tried so desperately to memorize. This is the dark side of the golden list. For every name carved on the stone monument of success, there are 100 ghosts broken by the system. But not all cheat sheets ended up in the mud. Some survived. Some made it through the search, through the exam, and back home. They were tucked away in attics, hidden in walls, passed down as secret family heirlooms, not of shame, but of ingenuity. And today, centuries later, one of them is resting under a glass case, under the soft glow of a museum light. Let's fast forward to the present day. Let's take a look at the legacy you left behind. We are going to jump forward in time. We are leaving the muddy courtyards of the Ming and Qing dynasties. We are leaving the smell of unwashed bodies and the fear of the wooden kangui. We are in the year 2025. You are standing in a quiet, climate-controlled room. The air is cool and smells of floor wax and old paper. You are in a museum, perhaps the Jiangnan Examination Hall Museum in Nanjing, or a private collection in Beijing. In front of you, behind a thick sheet of glass, is a piece of fabric. It's a Ma Bu Kan Jian linen vest. It looks yellowed, fragile, tattered at the edges, but lean in closer. Squint. Covering every square inch of this vest are characters. They are so small they look like dust mites. This single garment contains over 40,000 characters. It holds the entirety of the 4 books, parts of the 5 classics, and a collection of model essays. This is the Mona Lisa of cheating. This brings us to our final mainstream historical fact, the end of an era. On September 2nd, 1905, the Qing government, realizing that the ancient system was no longer sufficient to save a crumbling empire from modern threats, officially abolished the imperial examination system. Just like that, a system that had defined Chinese society for 1,300 years vanished. The millions of scholars who had spent their lives memorizing the classics suddenly found themselves holding worthless degrees. The cheat sheets, the hollow inkstones, the rat whisker brushes, they all became instant relics of a dead world. But looking at this vest, you don't feel the history of politics, you feel the history of panic. Think about the person who wore this. Maybe it was you in a past life. Think about the eyesight that was destroyed to write this. Think about the trembling hands that stitched it into the lining of a robe. Think about the sweat that soaked into this linen as the wearer sat in cell 45, terrified that a guard would notice the unnatural stiffness of his back. This vest is a monument to human desperation. It represents the lengths we will go to for a chance at a better life. It is unethical. Yes, it is illegal. Absolutely. But it is also deeply, heartbreakingly human. There's a fascinating irony here, a final academic twist, if you will. In its time, this vest was trash. It was evidence. If found, it would have been burned and its owner humiliated. But today, it is a national cultural relic. It is insured for millions of dollars. Scholars, the modern equivalents of the very people who would have condemned the cheater, now study it with magnifying glasses, marveling at the calligraphic excellence and the micro-engineering. The cheater didn't pass the exam, perhaps, but he passed the test of time. His work ended up in a museum, while the essays of the Zhuang Yuan, top scholar, are mostly forgotten in dusty archives. This leads to a final reflection on the culture of testing. We look back at these ancient scholars and laugh at their absurd methods, the pigeons, the underwear, the hollow beans. But are we different? Today we have high-tech earpieces, we have smartwatches, we have AI tools that write essays for us. The technology has changed, but the core mechanic is exactly the same. We are still humans standing in front of a dragon gate, be it the Gaokao, the SATs, or a job interview, terrified that we aren't enough, terrified that our own brains are insufficient. So we reach for a tool, we reach for an edge. The ancient cheater in the museum isn't a villain. He is a mirror. He tells us that the system is always rigid, but the human spirit is fluid. The system builds walls, humans build ladders or throw rocks over the walls. The system demands perfection, humans offer ingenuity. As you stare at that vest in the glass case, imagine the ghost of that scholar standing next to you. He is no longer wearing the heavy wooden kangyue. He is smiling. He points to the tiny character for virtue hidden under the armpit of the vest. "I wrote that," he whispers, "and I almost got away with it." The lights in the museum are dimming. The security guard is jangling his keys, signaling that it's time to leave. You walk out of the museum and into the modern night. The city lights are bright. The air is filled with the noise of cars, not the scratching of pens. You are free. You don't have to take an exam tomorrow. You don't have to memorize 400,000 words. You don't have to hide anything in your shoe. But as you walk, you check your pocket, just to be sure your phone is there. Just to be sure you have your connection to the world, your external brain, your modern cheat sheet. You smile. We never really stopped carrying the answers, did we? So, here we are. The journey is over. We've traveled from the flickering oil lamps of a desperate student's room to the cold, hard bricks of the examination cell. We've sewn silk into our clothes, chased rats for whiskers, bargained with corrupt guards, and stood trembling before the judgment of the empire. We've felt the weight of the Kang and the silence of the museum. It's been a long night, and if you've made it this far, you've passed the test. You didn't need a cheat sheet for this one. Now, let your shoulders drop. Seriously, let them drop. Unclench your jaw. That tension you're holding? That's the phantom weight of the exam basket. You can put it down now. You aren't in the cell anymore. There are no guards patrolling your room. There are no ghosts in the corner waiting to report you. The only thing demanding your attention now is the softness of your pillow. The only dragon gate you have to cross is the threshold into sleep. And the best part? There is no acceptance rate. Everyone gets in. Listen to the hum of the fan, or the wind outside, or just the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. Let the history fade back into the books. Let the ink dry. Let the ancient world settle into dust. You are safe. You are warm. You are done. End of the article. Good night.